The woman in the alley. The rain fell in thick sheets, soaking everything it touched and turning the pavement into a mirror of the cold gray sky above. The city pulsed with movement. Horns blared, people rushed past under umbrellas, and neon signs flickered in puddles. But tucked away in a forgotten alley just off Sunset Boulevard, silence hung like a wet curtain. There, between a dumpster and a brick wall covered in fading graffiti, a small food cart sat unmoving. Its once bright paint was chipped, and a faded, hand-painted sign read, "Maria's Tacos." Beside it sat a woman, slumped, wrapped in a plastic tarp that had failed to keep her dry. She was very pregnant. Her dark hair clung to her cheeks and her hands trembled around her belly as she whispered reassurances to the life inside her. Her name was Maria. Maria had once been a lively vendor, known in the neighborhood for her spicy tacos and warm smile, but things had changed. Her husband had left without a word 6 months ago. Her landlord had evicted her 2 weeks earlier, and now her food cart was all she had left. Even that was barely working. Its gas connection was faulty, and customers had stopped coming once rumors spread about food poisoning. She tried to fix it herself, but she had no money, no tools, and now no strength. The baby was due in a few weeks, maybe sooner. She had no hospital plan, no family nearby, and no idea what would happen next. The city, once full of promise, had turned its back on her. No one looked twice anymore, but one man did. He had walked past that alley a dozen times before. He lived nearby but kept a low profile. He preferred to walk at night unnoticed, wearing a simple jacket and cap. His name was Keanu. And on that rainy evening something pulled him toward the alley. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was fate, or maybe it was the soft, broken hum of a lullaby that reached his ears through the noise of the rain. He paused, glanced in the direction of the sound and saw a shape curled up next to the cart. He hesitated, then took a few slow steps forward, squinting through the downpour. As he stepped closer, Maria looked up, startled, clutching her belly and backing away slightly. "I'm sorry," she said in a weak voice, struggling to sit up straighter. "I'm not bothering anyone, I promise." Keanu held his hands up gently. "You're not bothering me at all," he said calmly, his voice soft and kind. "Are you okay?" Maria hesitated, then gave a small, bitter laugh. "Do I look okay?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped closer, knelt beside her, and took off his jacket. Without asking, he draped it over her shoulders. She blinked at him, confused and shivering. "You'll get wet," she murmured. "I'll be fine," he said. "But you won't if you stay out here much longer." Maria looked away. She didn't want pity. She had seen it before. People gave her sad eyes, maybe $1, then walked away. She had learned not to expect more. But Keanu didn't walk away. He noticed the food cart, the way her ankles were swollen, how she winced with every movement. He glanced at the sign, then back at her. "Maria?" he asked gently, pointing to the cart. She nodded. "This is yours?" Another nod. Keanu stood slowly. "Do you trust me?" She looked up sharply. Trust was a heavy word, but something in his voice, something calm and unwavering, made her pause. "I don't know," she whispered honestly. He didn't rush her. Instead, he extended a hand. "I have a car parked a few blocks away. It's warm. There's food. You can rest, just for a while, no pressure." Maria looked down at her belly. Her baby kicked, her fingers trembled, and for the first time in days she allowed herself to hope. Just a little. Just enough to take his hand. They walked together in the rain. She stumbled once, and he caught her gently, never letting go. Cars passed them. People stared. But no one said a word. To them it was just another man helping someone, but for Maria it was everything. When they reached the car, she hesitated. It was a sleek black vehicle. Nothing flashy, but clearly expensive. Clean. Safe. She sank into the passenger seat, gasping as the heat touched her skin. Keanu offered her a towel and a bottle of water from the back seat. She drank slowly, tears rolling down her cheeks without warning. Thank you, she said, voice cracking. Keanu started the engine. Let's get you somewhere warm. Maria didn't ask where they were going. She didn't care. She closed her eyes, letting the hum of the car lull her into something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. They drove through the city, the rain easing. Lights blurred past the windows. Maria opened her eyes once and noticed they were going uphill, toward the mountains, toward the neighborhoods where houses looked like dreams. She thought it was a mistake. Maybe he was dropping her off at a shelter nearby. Maybe. But then the gates opened. They pulled into a driveway longer than any road she had walked in months. The car stopped in front of a stone and glass mansion perched on the hillside like it had grown from the rock itself. Maria sat up slowly, unsure if she was dreaming. "This is your home?" she asked. Keanu nodded, getting out and opening her door. "Yeah." "Why me?" she asked as he helped her out. He didn't answer right away. He just looked at her with a deep sadness in his eyes. "Because someone helped me once when I was broken. Now it's my turn." Inside, the mansion was warm, filled with soft light and the smell of baked bread. Not cold and sterile like she imagined rich people lived. No. This place felt like someone cared about it. Photos lined the walls, books filled the shelves, and music played gently from unseen speakers. Maria stood awkwardly in the foyer, dripping water onto the marble floor. "Come on," he said gently. "You can change into something dry. I'll show you to a guest room." She followed him down the hallway, passing paintings and quiet corners that made the house feel lived in, not lonely. When he opened a door to a cozy room with a fireplace, she gasped. It had a bed with fluffy pillows, warm blankets, even slippers beside it. "Stay here tonight," he said. "Rest. No one will bother you. But no questions, just sleep." Maria sat on the bed, overwhelmed. She hadn't slept in a real bed in weeks, maybe months. Tears filled her eyes again. She didn't know why this man was helping her. She didn't know what he expected. But for now, she was safe. Keanu turned to leave. But just before he closed the door, he paused. "Maria," he said quietly, "if anything hurts, if you feel anything strange with the baby, please let me know. We'll go to the hospital." No hesitation. She nodded, lips trembling. He left the door slightly open, just enough to let the light peek through. As Maria lay back, staring at the ceiling, the baby kicked again. This time, she smiled. But deep in the quiet of that mansion, Keanu stood at a window staring out at the rain, remembering a night long ago when he was the one lost in an alley. He never told anyone, not even his closest friends. But tonight, something in Maria's eyes had reminded him of a promise he made to himself. And, as the fire crackled and the night deepened, neither of them knew that their lives had just changed forever. The weight of silence. Morning came slowly, creeping through the tall windows with golden fingers of sunlight that spread across the soft carpet and the ivory sheets wrapped around Maria like a gentle cocoon. For a moment, she forgot where she was. She felt warmth on her face, comfort in her bones, and a strange stillness in the air, so different from the street noise, the cold concrete, and the constant tension she had been living with for months. When she opened her eyes, the unfamiliar room greeted her again, reminding her that this wasn't a dream. The fireplace had gone cold during the night, but the warmth remained, tucked into the room's very walls, as if kindness itself had seeped into every corner. She sat up slowly, holding her belly as she breathed through the tightness that came and went like soft waves. The baby was still, maybe asleep, or maybe listening. Maria carefully moved her feet to the floor and stood up. The soft robe folded on the chair was not hers, but someone had thought of her when placing it there. She wrapped it around herself, walking slowly through the hallway, each step uncertain. The house seemed too quiet for such a grand place. She expected staff, people rushing about, the sound of phone calls and shouting voices, but there was none of that. Only peace. The kind that made her both grateful and anxious, like she didn't belong in it. She found her way to the kitchen by following the faint smell of coffee and cinnamon. The kitchen was large, but nothing about it felt cold. A few mugs were lined up neatly on the counter. Fruit sat in a bowl, fresh and bright. And Keanu stood, barefoot by the stove, flipping something in a pan with the kind of focus only someone at peace could carry. He turned slightly, giving her a soft nod as if she'd always been part of this home. "Morning," he said, placing a pancake on a plate and then sliding another into the pan. "I hope you slept all right." She hesitated near the door. "I did," she said quietly. "Thank you. Again. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." He gestured to the table. "Sit. Eat. Your baby needs it more than you know." She moved slowly, unsure if her legs would carry her all the way, but they did. When she sat, he poured her a cup of tea and placed a plate in front of her. No questions, no judgment. Just care. She watched him as he moved around the kitchen, graceful but grounded. There was something different about him, something she couldn't place. Not just the kindness, but a quiet sadness in his eyes, like he'd walked through a storm of his own and never spoke about it. As she ate, Maria finally broke the silence. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, voice shaking slightly. "You don't even know me. People don't just do this, not anymore." He paused by the sink, turning off the tap. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Then he slowly turned toward her, drying his hands with a cloth. "Years ago," he began, "I met someone who changed my life. Not because they were rich or powerful. They just saw me when I was invisible to everyone else. And they gave me something I didn't know I needed. Hope. Ever since then, I promised myself that if I ever saw someone in the same place, I'd try to give back." She watched him, waiting for more, but he didn't continue. She nodded slowly. "I still don't know why you picked me." "Because you didn't ask for help," he said simply. "But you needed it, and I was in a place to give it. That's enough." Maria looked down at her plate. Tears threatened to spill again, but she held them back. She wasn't used to this kind of honesty, or this kind of peace. Part of her kept waiting for the catch, for the moment the kindness turned into control or expectation. But that moment didn't come. After breakfast, Keanu offered to take her cart back from the alley. He said it wasn't safe to leave it there unattended, and even if it was damaged, it still mattered to her. Maria nodded but said nothing. The cart was more than metal and wheels. It was her last connection to the life she had tried to build. He left with a soft promise to return soon, and she watched him drive away through the front window, her fingers resting gently on the glass. The house suddenly felt too big again, too quiet. Maria wandered through the hallway, passing the same paintings and bookshelves she had seen last night. She stopped by a photo on the wall. It showed Keanu much younger, maybe in his 20s, standing beside an old motorcycle and laughing. Behind him stood a woman, her eyes bright, holding his arm tightly. There was something in that photo. Joy, yes, but also loss. Maria moved on, unsure why her chest felt so heavy. Eventually, she ended up in the library. It was a room filled with soft chairs, wood-paneled walls, and shelves that climbed to the ceiling. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, turning the dust in the air into gold. She ran her fingers along the books, touching spines worn from love and time. She found one that made her stop. The Little Prince. She hadn't read it since she was a girl. Sitting down slowly, she opened it and began to read, letting the words soothe her. They reminded her of simpler days, of the small apartment she grew up in, of her father's voice reading to her when she couldn't sleep. Hours passed. When Keanu returned, the food cart was hitched to a small trailer behind his car. It looked worse than she remembered. Paint scratched, one of the wheels bent, but it was there. He parked it beside the garage and came inside, wiping sweat from his brow. "It's safe," he said, as she came to meet him. "Might need some repairs, though." She looked at it through the window and nodded. "Thank you. I figured, maybe one day, if you want to get back on your feet, it could help." She turned to him, eyes wide. "You think I can still?" "I don't think," he said, with a calm smile. I know. They spent the rest of the day in quiet tasks, checking the cart, organizing her things, setting up her temporary stay. Every time Maria tried to help, he gently redirected her to rest. She was stubborn, though. She didn't want to feel useless. So instead, she cleaned the kitchen, folded laundry, and organized shelves while he worked outside. By evening, they sat in the garden under soft lights strung through the trees, drinking warm tea while the sun dipped below the hills. "This doesn't feel real," she whispered. "Real is what we make it," Keanu said. "And right now, this is yours." Maria looked at him, wondering how a man like him ended up living so quietly, helping strangers in silence, never asking for anything in return. There were layers to him, ones she hadn't seen yet, but something told her he was carrying wounds, deeper than most people ever would. As the stars came out, Maria suddenly winced. A sharp pain moved through her side. Not enough to cry out, but enough to notice. She put a hand on her belly and took a deep breath. "You all right?" Keanu asked instantly, already at her side. "Yeah," she lied, breathing slower. "Just a kick, maybe a little stronger than usual." He watched her for a moment but didn't push. He simply offered his arm and walked her back inside. That night, Maria couldn't sleep. The pain returned again and again, small but sharp. She sat on the edge of the bed, holding her stomach, counting the seconds between the waves. Something felt off. Not wrong exactly, but unfamiliar. She remembered what the nurse had once told her during a clinic visit. "If you start feeling pressure before your time, tell someone." Maria hesitated, and then another pain came, stronger this time. She stood slowly, heart racing, and stepped into the hallway. She didn't know where Keanu's room was, but the light under one door caught her attention. She moved toward it, knocking softly. Keanu opened the door almost immediately. He was in a simple t-shirt, reading a book. One look at her face and the way she held her stomach told him everything. "It's time," she whispered. He didn't hesitate. "Grab your bag," he said gently. "I'll start the car." Maria nodded, breath catching as another contraction hit. As they moved through the house toward the car, a gust of wind blew through the open door. It carried the scent of rain again, the promise of a storm. But inside that storm, something new was beginning. The night of the storm. The tires rolled over the slick pavement with a hum, the headlights carving two bright tunnels through the dark and rain-slicked streets. Inside the car, Maria gripped the armrest with one hand and her swollen belly with the other. Each contraction came stronger than the last, and though she tried to stay calm, fear sat heavy in her chest. The rain had started again, falling in thin needles that tapped against the windshield like 1,000 ticking clocks counting down to something she could not yet name. Keanu drove with focus, his knuckles white around the wheel, eyes sharp but calm. He said nothing, not because he didn't care, but because his words would be useless compared to the storm brewing inside her. His presence alone was steadying, and Maria held on to it like a ship clings to anchor during a hurricane. As they reached the hospital entrance, Keanu pulled into the emergency lane and rushed out, waving for a nurse who stood behind the glass doors. Maria was helped into a wheelchair as a flurry of movement began around her. Questions asked, vital signs taken, forms handed to Keanu with urgent eyes and clipped voices. She barely processed the chaos. All she could feel was the pressure, building deep inside, her body preparing for something that felt both miraculous and terrifying. They wheeled her away quickly, nurses speaking in soft tones meant to soothe, but she still looked back once to see if he was there. Keanu stood just outside the glass wall, watching her disappear down the hallway, his hand still holding the pen, the form half-filled. Their eyes met for only a second, but in that second Maria felt less alone. The hours crawled forward in painful, uneven steps. The hospital was full that night, with only 2 doctors attending the labor wing due to staff shortages. The storm outside had created roadblocks and minor accidents, so most staff were pulled toward emergencies. Maria was placed in a quiet delivery room, the lights dim, the machines blinking steadily beside her. A young nurse with tired eyes stayed by her side, checking her pulse and whispering encouragement. Still, the contractions were getting closer, sharper, and Maria's strength was fading. She'd never imagined giving birth this way, alone, in a strange hospital. While a storm howled like a beast outside the windows, the clock ticked on and pain took up more space in her body than breath. Her fingers clawed the bedsheets, her voice cried out with each wave, but no one familiar held her hand, until suddenly, someone did. She turned her head in a haze of sweat and tears and saw Keanu standing there, his hand wrapped around hers, firm and steady. He wasn't supposed to be in the delivery room, but he had spoken quietly with a nurse, offering no demands, just a simple plea. She shouldn't be alone. And somehow they had let him in. Maria sobbed, not from the pain, but from the comfort. His presence was a light in a collapsing world. She didn't know him well, but in that moment he was the only thing holding her heart together. "You're doing great," he whispered as her body tensed again. "I'm scared," she gasped, gripping his hand. "I know," he replied, brushing the wet hair from her forehead. "But you're stronger than you think." Time blurred after that. Pain and panic became one. The doctor came in, calm but fast. The baby's heart rate dipped once, and a brief wave of alarm passed through the room, but then things stabilized. Maria pushed, screamed, wept, and when it felt like she couldn't go on, she looked at Keanu, and each time she did, she found something new in his face. Strength, sorrow, peace, and something deeper than she could name. Maybe it was his past speaking through his silence. Maybe it was something about the way he carried the weight of the world and never asked for anyone to lighten it. And then, after what felt like eternity, there was a cry. Sharp. Pure. The sound of life breaking through pain. Maria collapsed back against the pillow, tears flooding her face as the baby's cry filled the room. The nurse held up the tiny newborn, red, wrinkled, screaming with breath that was brand new. "It's a girl," the nurse whispered. "You have a daughter." Maria reached out with shaking arms as the baby was placed on her chest. Warmth, weight, breath, love. It all crashed into her at once, and she cried harder than she ever had before. She whispered thank you over and over to the baby, to the nurses, to the universe. And when she looked up at Keanu, she said it to him too. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for not walking past me that night." He didn't reply. He simply smiled, brushing a tear from his cheek he didn't realize had fallen. "She's beautiful," he said softly. They spent the next few hours in that room, Maria holding her daughter close while the rain outside faded into a whisper. The nurses came and went, checking vitals, changing IVs, but there was a sacred stillness between them all. Keanu sat by her side, not as a celebrity, not as a stranger, but as a quiet witness to something more powerful than any film he had ever made. He looked at Maria, exhausted but glowing, and something inside him shifted. He had lived through so much loss. His daughter lost at birth, his partner passing months later. He had buried that pain so deep he thought it could never resurface. But tonight, in the birth of a child that wasn't his, he felt something come back to life. Not pain, not sorrow, something else. Maybe grace. When morning came, the storm had passed. The hospital glowed in soft blue light as the sun returned and Maria finally slept. Keanu stepped out into the hallway, letting the door close gently behind him. He walked slowly to the waiting area, sat on the edge of a plastic chair, and stared at the floor. He thought of the alley, the cart, the rain, the way her voice trembled when she said she didn't need help. He thought of the moment she first took his hand, and now the child who had just entered the world. The nurse approached with a clipboard. "You're not listed as a family member," she said carefully. "Would you like to be notified if anything changes?" He looked up, eyes red. "Yes, please. Let me know everything." "What's your relation?" she asked gently. He paused, then said, "A friend. Just a friend who cares." She nodded and walked away, leaving him alone with his thoughts. Back in the hospital room, Maria stirred. She opened her eyes to the sight of her daughter's tiny chest rising and falling. Her hand curled around one of Maria's fingers. In the stillness of that morning, she whispered a name. Grace. She didn't know why. Maybe it was because she had been given a second chance. Maybe because the man who helped her carried sorrow with the same name. Or maybe because her daughter, born in the middle of a storm, felt like the kind of miracle people wait their whole lives for. As she whispered it again, the baby stirred, and far away, down the hospital hall, Keanu felt something in his chest, like a breath returning. Echoes of the past, the days that followed passed in a strange, beautiful rhythm, as if the world had slowed down just enough for Maria to catch her breath. She stayed in the hospital for 3 more nights, resting, healing, and learning the delicate, exhausting rhythm of newborn life. Baby Grace was tiny, her skin soft as silk, her cries high and musical, and her eyes always seeking light even though she couldn't yet see it clearly. Maria would wake every few hours, sometimes from the sound of Grace's cries, other times from her own dreams full of shadowed alleys and storms. But every time she opened her eyes, she found something that steadied her. Grace curled against her chest, or Keanu sitting nearby, a book in hand, or a warm cup of tea placed by the bed before she even asked. He didn't hover. He didn't ask questions. He was simply there, present and calm, the way a lighthouse stays lit whether the sea is calm or raging. On the morning of the 4th day, Maria was discharged. The nurses hugged her tightly, one of them even tearing up as she whispered, "You're one of the bravest women I've ever seen." Maria smiled, but inside she was trembling. Not from fear, but from the weight of beginning again. She had a child now, a daughter who would rely on her for everything. And even though she was no longer alone in the rain, she didn't know what her future looked like. She had no income, no home of her own, no plan, just a food cart in need of repair, a heart stitched back together with quiet hope, and a baby who had already stolen her soul. When Keanu pulled up outside in the same black car, Maria hesitated before stepping in, not because she doubted him, but because she felt the enormous gravity of what came next. This man, this stranger who had taken her in, fed her, protected her, stayed up all night by her hospital bed, he had become a part of her story. And now she feared becoming a burden. But Keanu didn't treat her like one. He helped her into the car, carefully securing Grace in a baby seat he had installed just the day before. Maria watched him buckle it in, noticing how gently his fingers moved, how much care he gave to every detail. She couldn't help but ask softly, "Have you done this before?" He froze for a second, then nodded, eyes still focused on the seat. "Once. A long time ago." She didn't press. She could tell the memory behind that answer held pain, and she had grown to respect the silence he used to carry his scars. Back at the mansion, Maria was given a new room. Not the guest room, but something more permanent. It was quiet, warm, and filled with natural light. There was a crib waiting in the corner and a rocking chair beside the window. Maria stared at it, speechless. "I had it brought in yesterday," Keanu said behind her. Figured she deserved something soft to sleep in. Maria turned to him, her voice thick. "Why are you doing all this, really?" He looked at her, and for a long moment, the mask he always wore, the calm, the control, slipped. "Because when my daughter died," he said slowly, "I felt like the world had stopped making sense, like there was no reason to keep doing anything. But then I met people who gave me a reason to breathe again. I never got to hold her, Maria. I never got to hear her cry. And even now, years later, it still hurts. But being here, seeing you with Grace, it doesn't erase my past, but it gives it meaning." Maria's breath caught in her throat. She reached out, placing a hand gently on his arm. She didn't speak because nothing could match the weight of what he'd just said. But he saw the understanding in her eyes, and that was enough. The next few weeks fell into an unspoken routine. Maria woke early with Grace, feeding her and humming lullabies. Keanu often made breakfast, the scent of fresh toast and fruit filling the house. They ate together in the sunroom, surrounded by green plants and morning light. Sometimes they talked about music, books, or the world outside. Other times they sat in companionable silence, each finding a strange peace in the other's company. Maria found joy in simple things again, watching Grace smile in her sleep, feeling the warmth of real coffee in her hands, or hanging her laundry in the garden while sunlight danced on her skin. One afternoon, Maria walked into the garage where Keanu had been working on the food cart. He had rolled up his sleeves, revealing arms marked with the small scars of life lived fully. He was tightening a bolt under the grill, a soft rock song playing on the radio nearby. She watched him for a moment before speaking. "You fixed it?" she asked, surprised. He looked up and smiled. "Not yet, but close. Just needs a new gas line and a fresh coat of paint." She stepped closer. "Why go through all this trouble? I'm not even sure people will come back. After what happened, after they heard about someone getting sick, then we'll give them a reason to come back," he said simply. "We'll show them your food isn't just good, it's made with love. That matters." She blinked back tears. "You keep saying we, like I'm not doing this alone." "Because you're not," he said, without missing a beat. In the days that followed, they began rebuilding the food cart together. Maria painted while Grace slept in a stroller nearby, and Keanu handled the wiring and repairs. It was strange and beautiful, the way they worked as a team, never needing to define what they were to each other. They were two broken souls helping each other heal, one screw and brushstroke at a time. Then one evening, just as the sky turned pink and the air smelled like rain again, Maria heard a car pull up outside the gate. She stepped out onto the front steps, confused. No one ever visited, but the figure stepping out of the car made her freeze. It was Jason, her ex. He was thinner than she remembered, but his eyes were the same, sharp, selfish, and dangerous. He didn't smile when he saw her. He just stared, arms crossed. "I heard. You had the baby?" he said coldly. "Figured it's time I came back, got some rights, don't I?" Maria felt her knees weaken. All the fear she had buried rushed up at once. She shook her head. "You don't get to come back just because it's convenient. You left. You disappeared. Doesn't matter. She's my kid too," he said, stepping closer. "You're staying in some rich guy's mansion now? Must be nice. Probably forgot who you really are." Before Maria could respond, Keanu appeared at her side, silent but firm. Jason looked at him, scoffing. "And who the hell are you?" Keanu didn't raise his voice, he didn't threaten. He simply stepped forward and said quietly, "Leave. Now." Jason laughed. "What, you think you can buy her?" Keanu didn't flinch. "I didn't buy anything. I helped her when no one else did. Now get off the property." Jason's face twisted with anger, but something in Keanu's eyes made him pause. There was strength there, stillness like the eye of a storm. Jason muttered a curse, then turned and stormed back to his car. Tires screeched as he sped away, disappearing down the hill. Maria exhaled shakily, her whole body trembling. Keanu turned to her. "You all right?" She nodded slowly, but tears streamed down her cheeks. "He can't hurt you anymore," Keanu said softly. "Not while you're here." Maria looked at him, her heart full. She had been lost once. Forgotten. Discarded. But now, someone had stood between her and her past. Someone had given her the safety she had never known. And deep in her heart, something began to bloom, something she hadn't felt in years. Trust. The heart behind the flame days turned into weeks, and the mansion slowly transformed from a place of refuge into a place that felt like home. Maria no longer walked its halls like a guest afraid of taking up space. Instead, she moved with quiet confidence, holding baby Grace close to her heart while humming lullabies in the garden, cooking meals in the kitchen, and adding her own touches to corners of the house that had once felt too quiet, too untouched. It amazed her how the smallest things, a blanket draped over a couch, a framed drawing on the wall, the scent of freshly ground cumin in the kitchen, could breathe life into cold walls. And what amazed her more was how easily Keanu let it happen. He didn't just allow her to belong, he welcomed it. He smiled when he saw Grace in the mornings. He asked Maria what she wanted to cook, not out of politeness, but because he genuinely wanted to share those moments with her. And when he wasn't helping fix the food cart or preparing a nursery, he simply sat nearby, present, never demanding anything but always offering everything. One Saturday morning, Maria stood in front of the food cart with a roller in her hand. The new paint job gleamed in soft yellow and white, with hand-painted flowers along the sides and a clean new sign that read, Grace's Table. It had been her idea, to rename the cart not after herself, but after the miracle that had changed everything. Keanu had helped her design the logo, and he insisted on getting it printed by a local artist. They'd both agreed that this wasn't just a cart anymore. It was a symbol of rebirth, of resilience, of hope. As Maria ran her hand along the smooth edge of the counter, she remembered the very first night she had cooked on the streets, cold, scared, uncertain, and desperate to prove she could make something of herself. Now, as Grace cooed softly in a sling wrapped around her chest, Maria felt something entirely different. Readiness, not just to survive, but to begin again, with pride. The relaunch was set for Sunday afternoon at the local farmer's market. Keanu had made the arrangements quietly, using his connections to secure a space. He never mentioned his name, never called in favors for attention, only to give Maria a chance without the spotlight of celebrity getting in the way. This is your story, he had told her, not mine. Sunday arrived like a quiet celebration. The weather was perfect. Blue skies stretched above the market, and a soft breeze carried the scent of flowers, roasted corn, and laughter through the air. Maria wore a simple white blouse with rolled sleeves and an apron she had stitched herself, while Grace slept peacefully on her chest. She stood behind the cart, wiping down the counters one last time as early customers trickled in. Keanu stood off to the side, dressed plainly, hands in his pockets, blending into the crowd like he always did. His presence grounded her, but he didn't interfere. This was her moment, and then it began. The first customer, a young woman with a toddler, hesitated at the front of the cart. "Is this the new place everyone's been talking about?" she asked curiously. Maria smiled. "I hope so." The woman scanned the menu. "Grace's Table, that's a beautiful name." Maria nodded. "She's my daughter, born just a few weeks ago." "You're working already?" "Some things are too important to wait for," Maria replied. "Feeding people is part of who I am." The woman ordered 2 tacos, and when she took her first bite, her eyes widened. "Oh wow, this tastes like home." Those words echoed louder than the crowd around them. One by one, more people came. Drawn by the scent, the colors, the gentle joy that seemed to float in the air around the cart. Maria moved with grace and speed, handing out tacos, rice bowls, and her homemade lime soda. People smiled. Some came back for seconds. One woman asked if Maria did catering. Another offered to feature her in a local food blog. Maria couldn't believe it. She'd barely printed menus. She hadn't even set up an Instagram page. By noon, a line had formed. She was sweating, exhausted, but glowing. Keanu stepped in only once when he saw her starting to wobble on her feet. He gently took Grace from her arms, cradling the baby like she was porcelain, giving Maria the freedom to move faster behind the grill. No one in the crowd recognized him, and if they did, they said nothing. He wasn't the star of this show. Maria looked up once and saw something in his eyes. Pride. Not the kind born from ego, but the deep kind that comes from seeing someone you believe in rise from the ashes. By late afternoon, Maria had sold out. Every dish gone, every bottle of soda finished. The customers who came late promised to return next weekend. She stood behind the cart, stunned, holding the empty cash box in one hand and wiping a tear from her cheek with the other. "You did it," Keanu said, walking over with Grace in his arms. Maria looked at him and whispered, "We did it." That night back at the house, Maria sat on the couch with Grace in her lap while Keanu lit a fire in the living room. The baby gurgled, content, and the room glowed with warmth. They didn't speak much. The silence was enough, but as the flames crackled and shadows danced on the walls, Maria felt something shift inside her, something unspoken, deeper than gratitude. She turned to him. "Why do you live like this?" He raised an eyebrow. "I mean, you have everything. This house, your career, but you live alone, quiet, hidden, like you're waiting for something you don't expect to ever come." He stared into the fire for a long time before answering. "I think, when you've lost as much as I have, you stop chasing things. You stop trusting happiness. It becomes easier to give than to receive, to help than to heal." Maria reached out, placing her hand on his. "But you deserve healing too." He looked at her and something flickered in his eyes, vulnerability, raw and sudden. He swallowed hard. "So do you," he said. Outside, thunder rolled low in the distance. Another storm was coming. But inside the house, two souls who had lived through their own storms sat beside each other, not as strangers, not as saviors or victims, but as two people learning how to live again. And as Grace cooed in her sleep, Maria leaned against Keanu's shoulder and he didn't move away. For the first time in years, neither of them felt alone. The truth we carry the next few weeks unfolded like pages from a book Maria never expected to read. A book where each chapter brought not chaos or heartbreak, but quiet victories. Grace grew stronger with each passing day, her tiny hands grasping for light, her cries turning into coos, her eyes slowly recognizing the world around her. Maria fell into a rhythm she had once believed was beyond her reach. Early morning feedings, long walks under orange sunsets, and the joy of preparing meals not just to survive, but to share. Her food cart, now permanently stationed at a bustling weekend market near Silver Lake, became a known fixture. Customers greeted her by name, asking for the usual, complimenting her on the tenderness of her tortillas or the warmth of her smile. Even local news did a small feature titled, "From the Alley to the Heart of the Market," and though Maria felt embarrassed by the spotlight, she was proud. Not for the attention, but for proving to herself she could rise, rebuild, and redefine her life on her own terms. Yet beneath the surface of comfort and daily routine, something deeper stirred. The bond between Maria and Keanu had grown beyond gratitude or shared silence. They moved through the house like two constellations orbiting each other, never colliding, never needing labels, but undeniably connected. He would sit on the porch, with Grace asleep on his chest, reading old poetry aloud while Maria watered the garden. She would brush his hair back when he fell asleep on the couch after long hours helping her organize the business finances. They didn't speak of love, not directly, but it lived in the way he waited outside during Grace's vaccinations, hands clenched but calm. It lived in how she made sure his favorite tea was always waiting for him when he came in from his evening walks. Still, they hadn't spoken about the future, and deep down Maria knew they would have to. One Sunday morning, as light filtered through the trees and the house smelled of vanilla and citrus, Maria heard a knock at the door. It wasn't loud, not urgent, but different. When she opened it, she found a woman in her 50s standing there, elegant, confident, holding a leather folder in her arms. Her name was Lillian, and she introduced herself with a careful smile. "I'm Mr. Reeves's legal advisor," she said gently. "I've come to discuss something important with you with his permission." Maria hesitated, then invited her in. They sat in the sunroom, Grace resting in her crib nearby, while Lillian opened the folder and handed her a stack of papers. "This," she said, "is a trust. Mr. Reeves has arranged for ownership of the food cart, the business name, and a small commercial space he recently acquired in your name. It also includes a modest fund for Grace's early education." Maria stared at the papers. Her throat tightened. "He didn't tell me. He wanted you to feel like you were succeeding on your own, but he also wanted to make sure you'd be protected, in case anything happened." "Why now?" Maria asked, her voice thin with emotion. Lillian looked at her with eyes filled with quiet understanding. "Because he's planning to leave for a while." Maria felt the world tilt beneath her. Leave? Where? He's been offered a film project overseas. Something personal. He hasn't accepted it yet. He wanted to speak to you first. When Lillian left, Maria stood at the window, for a long time staring at the driveway, her mind heavy with questions. When Keanu returned later that afternoon, she met him at the garden path before he could even open the front door. Her eyes were sharp, filled not with anger, but with clarity. You were going to leave without saying anything. Keanu paused, then gave a small nod. I wasn't sure how to tell you. So you sent a lawyer? I thought it would be easier if… Easier? She interrupted, her voice rising. Easier for who? Because it's not easier for me. He looked down. I didn't want to make it harder for you. I thought, if I stepped away quietly, you'd keep going. Stronger. Freer. Maria walked past him, pacing the path lined with jasmine. You think walking away is kindness? After everything we've been through? It's not about that, he said, stepping closer. I've spent years learning how to be useful, not how to stay. I don't know how to stay, Maria. Not without hurting someone. Not without breaking something. Then maybe it's time you learned, she said, her voice cracking. Because we're not asking for a perfect man. We just need you to show up. Silence hung between them. Then quietly Keanu said, I'm scared. Maria turned to him. Of what? Of being happy again. And with those words, the walls between them finally fell. She stepped forward slowly, until she was close, enough to see every line on his face, every memory etched in his eyes. She reached for his hand and held it tight. Happiness isn't a betrayal of your past, it's what your past survived for. They stood there, hand in hand, while Grace stirred softly in the distance, her cries carried by the wind like a quiet reminder of all they had built together. That evening, they sat beneath the stars on the back porch, Grace sleeping peacefully in her cradle beside them. Keanu didn't speak of leaving again. Instead, he asked Maria what she would name the restaurant when she expanded. She smiled and said, maybe something simple, something that feels like home. Home, he repeated softly. I like that. Maria leaned her head on his shoulder, and they watched the night stretch endlessly before them. No promises, no labels, just presence, just peace. In the days that followed, the paperwork was signed, the trust finalized, and Keanu's bags remained unpacked. He stayed. Not because she needed saving, but because he had been saved too. Together, they cooked meals for the neighborhood. Grace grew and learned to laugh, and the food cart that once sat broken in an alley became the heart of a growing business, one built on second chances, resilience, and quiet, extraordinary kindness. And in a house on a hill where grief had once echoed, there was now laughter. The kind that doesn't forget the past but forgives it.